very happy to give this lecture, but I've been here a few times, and every time I've been probably able to surprise people with what I'm going to tell, or the way in which we're doing it, and I think this will be the same. So I will lecture in English. There's no translation for most of the students. That's not a problem. If you have questions, Masha is here, so that you can ask the questions in Russian. That's not a problem. But what I'll talk about is today, I will actually not talk about entrepreneurship. I will talk about economics. And I do this because we are here in the Institute of Economics and Management. I'm also an economist by trade. So we've done a lot of workshops also with the students on entrepreneurship, but my topic will be different. It will be different. It will be about economics. And it will be about economics and the sense of how economics informs entrepreneurial society. So where is all this coming from? So it will not be about how do we do business models, customers, etc. It will be about how can we use the theories that we've been learning and studying in economics. How does that inform us for the phenomena that we're studying with entrepreneurship? So basically the study of economics is about the behavior of people and in general. So why do people do things what they are doing? So it's not about how people do things, but often why they do it. So if I have a topic about the entrepreneurial society, so why do this entrepreneurial society arises? Then it's about how can economic theory inform us about the things that we see. So that's a bit like the things that I'm after today. So my idea is here to use a lot of, let's say, conceptual things that we know from economics, and how can these theories inform us about the rise of the entrepreneurial society, entrepreneurship that we see around us. So this is my, let's say, my broad aim. Maybe also to connect, let's say, a lot of the teachers and students and staff between what you see in practical entrepreneurship and how you in a university study entrepreneurship. Because that's a different thing. You can coach students on becoming entrepreneurs, but if you're an academic and you study entrepreneurship, then what you study is the phenomena of how people become and are entrepreneurs. So I hope also to inspire with this lecture a lot of, let's say, the research themes that we've seen in the study of entrepreneurship as well. So I have many aims in this. So also for people who have to write their master's thesis and things like that. For students, I hope that this gives you a bit of inspiration, and I think to inspire you about that. So this is my aim. So I have a few slides, and I'll talk about these slides, and let's see how it goes. So I'm from the Netherlands, so there's differences in how you teach. So I'm very used that people ask questions during the lecture and not during the breaks. So if you have any questions or something is not clear, also not a problem. Please ask and interrupt me with a question. So often from the Netherlands I get a bit frustrated if people ask no questions. So I think that this is pretty impolite of you if you don't ask me questions. So that is a bit like the cultural differences maybe. But if you stay silent, then I think you don't like me. So that's important to understand. So okay, my first slide is a bit of a secret that I want to share with you. Because this is the secret, because if we want to know how we should deal with economics and economic theories and how they influence the entrepreneurial society, then first of all I have to explain to you how the economy actually works. Because the economy, if you look around us, is a complex system which has certain parts, and the problem of the economy as an animal, the economy, is that it is a very complex thing where lots of things are interacting. But I think that this is where I'm very happy to share the slides later, so you can take pictures, it's not forbidden. but I'm also happy to share the slides now. So this is a bit about how the economy works. So what is the economy? What does the economy study? It studies, let me just, this person. So economy is about people balancing themselves. So that is what economics studies. So economics is not the study of fiscal policy, of what the state does. Economics is about the individuals. It's about how individuals make choices. And each individual is aware that if he or she does more of one thing, they can do less of another thing. So economics basically is the study of trade-offs. How do we trade off in life all kinds of things? So that is what economics studies. So it is about why do people make the choices that they make. So that is on top. So basically it studies how people decide on production, consumption, all kinds of things, friendships, marriage, doesn't matter. This is also economics because it is about any choice that you can think of. The only thing that we will say is that we have two, if we are humans, if I will look inside your head, then of course you are, for a large part, you are an animal. So you simply do things. But there's also a lot of things where you make a choice, where you think of, where shall I study? Shall I visit my parents in the evening, etc. Which you make consciously. So that is the study of economics. Is that we study how people make these kind of choices. Now what we know is that if we look around us, the choices that we make are steered, informed by certain big things. So a big thing is that we base our choices on the information sets that we have. And often these information sets are imperfect. So we make choices with the things that we know. So it's an important part to think, okay, what do people know? What kind of information sets do they have? Because that is very important as a basket of what determines the choices that people make. So I put that on the left. Information set in economics, very important variable. Another important thing is that we all have a background that forms our norms, the way in which we deal with each other, the beliefs that we have, what is a just society. All these kind of things make us choose A over B. So it's information, norms, beliefs that are, let's say, the boundary things that we put into the systems in which we make choices. And we have all kinds of choices. Now, of course, if you go deeper than that, you can ask the question, where is information coming from? Where are your norms? Where are your beliefs coming from? And the thing that I'm after as an economist is that if we move towards different choices, for example, becoming an entrepreneur, creating an entrepreneurial society, then something must change. Because we see people making different choices. So something must then change in their information sets. It must change in their norms and beliefs. And we can ask where these changes are actually coming from. So this is my conceptual type of framework of analysis. So we have information, norms, beliefs, these kind of things. But there are also, and that's an important, let's say, input as well, we also have what we call incentives. So you want to be rich, therefore, you know that companies pay a lot of money, they provide incentives, high wages, and these incentives make you choose something. So it's not only information, your norms and values, but the large ball on top of that is that in life we all face all kinds of triggers, which we are calling incentives. Where do these incentives coming from? They often come from markets, prices of products, wages in the labor market. So the market economy provides the individual with all kinds of incentives for which the individual makes different choices. However, not only markets provide incentives, there are all kinds of institutions, regulations, they're hard institutions, but institutions can also be soft, like culture, who provide all kinds of boundaries for the choices that we're making. So you see that the economy as a choice-generating mechanism is a complex system where people have information sets, beliefs, values that come from markets, that come from institutions. So the conceptual question for this lecture is that if people, in the middle here, make different choices, how they make efforts, it must come from the things that you see around them. And as a roadmap, I'm going to talk about the changes in 3 directions. 3 directions, 3 changes in the economy that might have a big influence on the choices that people make. And I will start with looking at the macroeconomy. So how can macroeconomic theory inform us on, let's say, the movements towards the entrepreneurial ecosystem? Then I'll look at more the information set on urbanization as an important kind of thing. And lastly, I will look at changes in the institutional environment that might move us towards an entrepreneurial society. So I have, let's say, a theater play in 3 parts. This is the opening act, like setting, and then I'll first talk about the macroeconomy, then I talk about regional and city level, and then I talk about conceptual kind of things like institutional frameworks. So these are my 3 plays of informing us why do we see the entrepreneurial society. You ready? Yes? Okay. So I start with looking at the macroeconomy. Bang. This is my slide. So, what we know from the macroeconomy is that if we think about macroeconomic dynamics, so dynamic macroeconomics, we have one. So if you wake an economist up and think about, so how does the macroeconomy move over time, then he goes up in the night and he shouts, Solow, the Solow Model, because that is the central model in macroeconomics about how the macroeconomy moves. So if you ask the question, what is the connection between our general concept in macroeconomics, the Solow Model, and the rise of the entrepreneurial society? Then it's probably this. So a Solow Model, if I start here, intuition in mathematics is pretty simple, because we know that the economy, so let's say production Y, is a function of what we put in, labor and capital. There's no need to specify the function f at this moment. And some kind of a technology that this economy is using, which I call simply A. Now it's important in economics that if you have any functions, mathematical functions, and you want to describe these kind of things, that you put a bit of mathematical structure on it. So it cannot be completely open type of mathematical equation, because you want to look at, let's say, individual and equilibrium type of choices. And the crucial, let's say, element in the Solow model is the properties of how capital actually changes the level of production. So obviously, this is what we call in economics the Imada conditions about economic growth. And it's simple because, yes, of course, if you put more capital into economy, then the economy becomes bigger. That's obvious. But before we add there, it's simply to do a small kind of transformation, because if I divide production by the amount of labor, then what I get is income per head. So we're not that interested in an economy, how big the economy in total is, but how much each of you earns. So if you do that, and this is very, very, let's say, conceptual math, if you divide it by L, you should also divide the right-hand side by L. So L divided by L is simply 1, so it drops out of the function. And then you have K divided by L, which then stays there. So the simple thing about the Solow model, just to get the intuition, is why is America rich and Botswana poor? The answer is pretty simple, because in the US they have more capital per head of persons. Which sounds obvious. Capital we don't have defined here yet. That can be fixed capital, machinery, but also human capital, knowledge, cultural capital, doesn't matter. It's about the concept. So each person can command higher levels of any form of capital, and that is why they can produce more. But we see a second thing, and that's a crucial thing arising in this theory, in Solow theory, and that's the A. And the A is in front of it. And you can think of this A as shifting the whole curve. So here you see the curve. So let's say income per head. So if A is higher, then the whole curve shifts. Now you could call this A something like technology. The way in which the economy transforms certain combinations of labor and capital in output. And that is crucial in the modern theory. So it is the way in which, we all have people, we all have human capital, we all have fixed capital, but what do we do with it? That's the important kind of thing of the A in mathematics. And so here we have a bit of setting. Turning back to, let's say, these Imada conditions, they're also important because, yes, if we put in more capital in the economy, it becomes bigger, but increasingly less so. And that is the crucial neoclassical condition. So we have declining marginal productivity of capital. So a first piece of capital makes a lot of difference, but the second one makes also growing, but less than the first one. And so you're hungry, the first sandwich fills you up, the second sandwich is nice, but less nice than the first one. That's a bit like DIA. If you have that, then the curves that map out over time, if the economy grows, develops, are actually concave. And why is that? Why is that? Because if you put in more capital in the economy over time, yes, the economy becomes bigger, but increasingly less so. And the Solow model tells us that over time, if we accumulate capital, at a certain moment, we go to a stable rate and low rate of growth, because the marginal productivity of capital is going to maybe zero. So we know that over time, and that's, let's say, the tragedy of the macroeconomy, in the long run we all die, in that sense, because yes, if we have built up the economy with lots of capital, it stops. So productivity, growth, levels of productivity, they are bound to fall over time. But there is one thing. So even I put one A1 with my balancing part actually going down, because yes, you can grow, but if you grow, but if you have congestion, if you have environmental problems, it might actually go down. So you stabilize and then it becomes less so. So that's very well possible. Now the thing is, of course, to escape this tragic ending of the economy, there is only one thing that can save us. And that is the A. The A can save us. It's not K. It's not building new cities, roads, really newly constructing Moscow and provide jobs. These are all temporary measures that will not help. The only thing that you can do in the long run is use A. So shift the curve. So then we can think of how important is this curve shifting. Again, this is a bit of a start, let's say, rehearsal for the economists in the room, the students. What of course, if you're an economist, what you would do is say, okay, so I would like to know in economic development and growth, and how important is labor, capital, and this A. So how do we do that? Let's run simply a regression where we have the level of production as a function of labor, capital, and some kind of error term across countries, and then we can estimate something. What is the error term? So some countries, although they have the same level of capital and labor as another country, are far richer. So that's an error in econometrics. And we can ask, where is the error coming from? Because the error actually captures this A, the difference that we have not estimated here. So that's an empirical strategy. Now, if you have an econometrics, suppose you run a regression with the amount of labor in the country, the amount of capital in the country, and then the GDP. Then your regression output will also show an R squared. And the R squared tells you basically how much of the variation in income levels is explained by the factors that I put in the model. This is labor and capital. If you do that, then the R squared that will turn up is basically 0.3. So only 30% of the differences in income levels of countries is explained by the factors of the Solow model. Put differently, this A is very important because it is captured. So what is the A? That's a big debate. And here you see 4 economists, famous economists that have very, let's say, classical economists who have put different stories. So you see, obviously, Karl Marx. Karl Marx was the person of actually the capital in that sense. You have a question? No? Okay. Let's say he was the first one. Of course, you know him as the father of communism, etc. But well, he was there before communism, so he must have done something different. Marx started off with, let's say, studying this, let's say, crucial trajectory of capital in the economy and capital accumulation. So that's important contribution, theoretical contribution of Marx in that sense. You also have John Stuart Mill, who was, let's say, so he would say, look, father of, let's say, the market economy, this A, statistically it's the case that countries that have a market economy, so use a market economy to allocate, they have higher levels of productivity for the same levels of labor and capital. So markets matter as an important element in A. And you can see this all around you. Then you have to the right Keynes, who would say yes, but let's say the planning of labor capital over the economy is important. And there is a less well-known person in the middle. But that is Joseph Schumpeter. And you could call Schumpeter the father of entrepreneurship. And Schumpeter, a famous Austrian economist, argued, okay, if we look at this mechanism of growth, then we can say something about what A actually is. So what is steering productivity? And the crucial insight of Schumpeter's theory of entrepreneurship is what makes A high is the picture that you see below. And it's actually also Steve Jobs there. It's the mechanism of creative destruction. So it's the mechanism of growth, it's the mechanism of creative destruction where Steve Jobs kills Bill Gates. So underlying the theory of growth is, yes, we understand labor and capital, but underneath it must be a mechanism that makes us do different things with labor and capital over time, which affects this level of A. And that is the process of creative destruction. So the rise of the entrepreneurial society, so the claim here is pretty simple. If you look at macroeconomics, why are we moving to an entrepreneurial society? It's not something that we should celebrate. It's something that we do because we are dying. Our engines of growth have fallen flat. The only thing that we can do now, we cannot pump more oil, we cannot make the 10th IT application, build the road. We have to do something different, and therefore we have to kill what we've been doing in the past. So basically the idea of macroeconomics is that we are all here. If we don't do anything, so we're moving towards a different society because we have to. That's the point. Not because we like entrepreneurship, but because we have to as a society. So I'm not going to be completely positive about entrepreneurial society here in this lecture, if you were anticipate this. Yeah? So this is a bit like the first thing. Now I'd like to present a bit of empirical evidence, but might be a bit shocking, on where do we see this. Now first of all, let me explain a bit like what this creative thing is. So a bit of theory, because this was macro theory. You can also see it in your microeconomics books. Pretty simple. Because you have simply a market economy, supply and demand. If the prices are higher than the costs in the economy, then what happens? This market is pretty lucrative. So people enter this market. If people enter the market in microeconomics, we see the left curve, the curve shifting to the red curve. More supply for a given level of demand means that prices fall. Our microeconomic textbooks tell us that this process continues until the price level is equal to the production level, to the right, of the most efficient producer. Intuitively, what you teach students in the first year of economics is that if you have competition in the market and people can freely enter the market, only the most efficient firms survive in the end and can stay in the market. And that's a good thing, because these efficient firms can produce the best way, so they can transfer all value added to consumers. So this is, let's say, the first welfare theorem is a Pareto welfare theorem. So pretty simple. But think about, you are an efficient producer with some others in the market and you don't earn anything. That's the end game, the microeconomic end game. We first saw the macroeconomic end game, but the microeconomic end game is simply this point, where we only have firms who make no profit and stay in the market. You can do two things. You can die, or you put all your effort in being more efficient, innovating than the others, and create this. So the ultimate end game of any microeconomic equilibrium is moving towards new information. Basically, that's the idea of creative destruction as well. So we have the macro and the micro type of setting here. Okay. A bit of evidence. This is a long-term trend for the country I'm from, but also a few other countries, UK, US, to show, let's say that this is not a unique kind of trend. So what we see basically is the blue line, are the trend lines of productivity over time since the 1970s. And the simple observation is that in contrast to what we're all seeing, productivity simply is slowing. So this economic growth over time is slowing for the last 30 years. It's not dramatic. We still have 1-2% on average, but basically it's following exactly the Solow path. So you might think, okay, but we all have smartphones and new kind of things, but you also know that your smartphone is not making you, by definition, more productive. Actually, you spend a lot of time on Facebook. So there is a trade-off that you have better information, but you also are addicted to the smartphone. If you compare that to the introduction of the car or the steam engine, it's negligible. So your rector can talk about the second or the fourth industrial revolution. It doesn't show up yet. So we're dying. And you can think, okay, there are, of course, this is highly debatable in the sense that you can say, well, yeah, but we have better quality and we don't measure quality. So these are indeed very important questions in economics that you can go after. But in general, you see the Solow Model happening. We see that there's less and less room to make people richer, because that's also how you can see it. If you don't have income growth or productivity growth, we all stay on the same level. So we cannot redistribute it too much. So if we're all growing 10%, then you may grow 8%, you're still happy, and he can grow 12%, he's more happy. But at 10%, it's much easier to make relative differences. But if we have only 1% growth, if you have 2%, 3%, you have -1. So you become poorer. So this is the thing, eh? The thing is that if we have only 1% growth, some people can be richer, but the others become poorer. That's hard. So we have less room to maneuver for social mobility. Important thing to consider here. This is for Russia, China, India. So let's say the main point is, let's say that I'll go over this, is that innovation levels are too low to return to this kind of growth. So if you think about China, yes, they pump in a lot of people, and therefore they grow, but not per capita. Russia, diversification, investment in technology, compared on a world scale. India, nice in ICT, but not so much in innovation. It's also the large markets, yes, they are growing, but they're dying for a different reason. Low inputs in A. This kind of thing. So I go back also for my country, because I've shown here, if you look at United States, the UK here, so you see that the trend is pretty much the same. So I show a few things here in this slide for the Netherlands, but they are the same kind of things. And they are crucial, I think, for the macro story of the entrepreneurial society. So a first kind of thing to note, it's not so easy to note, is here, is that for a long period, we see these lines going down, and these are actually levels of income inequality. So basic thing, if you look at the West, since the 1960s, we had high levels of growth. These high levels of growth allowed society to make the poor richer and the rich relatively poorer. So to make the society more equal. So of course, you see income growth for all, but the crucial thing in the data for all countries in the West is that for this period of 30 years, income inequality went down dramatically. But what you also see is the mechanism that I showed you, is that since the last 20 years, these lines are stable. And actually, they start to move up a bit. So the big thing in the West is, for the last 20 years, if we have growth, people with low incomes have not profited from those more than rich. Actually, for the last 5 or 6 years, the rich start profiting more than the poor. And we see income inequality going up again. We also see on top for the Netherlands the difference between average wages and the highest 10% wages in growth terminology, and you see it moving up. So, a bit of conclusion is, it's all very nice with the emergence of the entrepreneurial society as an answer to this long-term trend of lower productivity. However, we have to live with poorer getting poorer and rich people getting richer. So a big trade-off might be, if you look around you, is that we can also all cheer, we should all be entrepreneurs, but only a few succeed, they will be very rich, and income inequality will go up. Which is probably an important downside of the rise of the entrepreneurial society. So this is a bit like a first type of stylized fact and argument. In more detail, one of the most important, the most studied phenomena in economics today is what you call job polarization. And you see this for the Netherlands to the right. And it's an outcome of the entrepreneurial society, and it's the crucial, let's say, worry of the entrepreneurial society. And I'll show you what this graph means, and it's actually quite modest for the Netherlands. If you would do this kind of graph to the right for the US, the much will be much more pronounced. So this is a graph which shows on this axis wage levels. So to the right are high wages, and to the left are low wages. Yeah?
I have a question. Does that mean that if nearly everybody comes to entrepreneurship, which fail, do they same way give resources to whom rise up, to whom success? Do they give the resources when they fail for one who wins?
Well, at least they fail. So a lot of people have to become entrepreneurs because they die anywhere else. Only a few succeed. The other ones are simply poor. Do they give resources? I don't think so, on average. It's simply you succeed or you fail. It's not so much that the winners steal from you.
In a society where nearly everybody is an entrepreneur,
yeah.
This ratio who participate in entrepreneurship is higher than usual. So there are more persons who fail and...
yes, and we have also very poor entrepreneurs who might not necessarily fail, but in the Netherlands there are many people who call themselves entrepreneur, but they don't have the incomes of people who have a job. I come back to that later. So here what we see is the phenomena of job polarization. So on the vertical axis you see where are new jobs. So what is the job creation type of activity in the economy? And basically what you see is that job creation is high on the outsides of the markets. Which tells us that in Western economies there are more jobs in very high wages and very low wages. Basically, if you look at your region, there are more jobs in IT that pay a very high salary, and there are also more jobs in the coffee bar which pay very low salaries. But the jobs in the middle die out. Jobs in factories, employment, university, all these jobs are going because of online education, of the fact that we have machine learning, artificial intelligence, robots, skill bias, that all these kind of things that we cheer about in the entrepreneurial society. But this means if you are a graduate student, if you end up university, your basic problem as a student in the modern economy, entrepreneurial economy, is in the labor market there is no middle. So either you are the lucky one that gets a very high paid job, or you are very poor. There's nothing in between anymore. So it is very nice to have the entrepreneurial society. Few make it. Lots of people have jobs that pay low wages, but nobody is, let's say, in the middle. And that outcome of the entrepreneurial society, I will claim later, creates a lot of political problems. Yeah?
What about the immigration issue? on this figure of society in Europe?
So in the Netherlands, probably not at all, because they're simply overestimated in the numbers. This is about 14 million people that's happening, and we have probably 40,000 Syrian refugees. The problem, of course, with the Syrian refugees is that people who are here, especially here, these people are actually quite happy. These are the people who are the Uber drivers, etc. They have a job. It pays not much, but at least they have a free kind of job. But the people, the Trump voters, they are here. Low end of the labor market, less jobs, unemployed. These people don't know how many Syrian refugees are in the Netherlands, but they blame it. Not on technology or the labor market or the entrepreneurial society, but on the Syrians. The problem with migration in the West is that people don't, so I should give this lecture to people in Overvecht or whatever, so it's not the Syrians that cause this, but they think that these are the refugees that cause these kind of things. But that's of course not the case. And these are big macro kind of things. So the problem of the entrepreneurial society is that we have job market polarization, whereas many people even with high university education cannot get a decent job anymore. Only a few succeed, often if they have a bit of service. So there are costs to this. Okay. Macro. So this kind of choices, if we talk about, so why do people become entrepreneurs, also with your question, so we see that we have a declining middle, in the middle. Many of these people cannot find jobs in factories, they cannot find jobs in government anymore, they cannot find them. So these are the people often who turn to entrepreneurship. So we have to look a bit deeper into these labor market dynamics of why people actually become entrepreneurs. And that's my next slide. And I talk a bit about, let's say, these kind of macro theories. So this is the theory. So what you have to understand, of course, is that if you have this balancing person, this person has to choose: do I become an entrepreneur or do I look for a job? That's basically what people do in the labor market. Now you can imagine that when people choose this is, let's say, an equilibrium of two markets. Because you have a market for jobs and you have the market for entrepreneurship. And these markets are on top. And of course they influence each other. So on the right, you have Robert Lucas, who is, let's say, the father, by the way, also finance minister of the US, a Chicago economist, who is the founder of what you would call occupational choice theory, the main theory in labor economics, where you say, well, why do people choose occupations that they do? So if you think about why do people become entrepreneurs, it's natural that you would start at this kind of occupational choice, because in a sense, entrepreneurship is an occupational choice. So on the right you see simply a labor market, labor demand, labor supply, and you would see some kind of an equilibrium wage. And people become entrepreneurs if they can earn more as an entrepreneur than the equilibrium wage in the economy. That sounds pretty obvious, isn't it? Now you can think of entrepreneurs as that all of us, so can entrepreneurship, are you born in entrepreneurship? Can you teach entrepreneurship? Well, both are actually true. You can both teach it and you are born. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. So let us assume that for some reason people differ in entrepreneurial ability. And we look a bit later what entrepreneurial ability actually is. And we can line up people in a distribution for entrepreneurial ability. And these are probably on the vertical axis. So this is what you call, does anybody did a test? What kind of distribution is this? Statistical ones? Statistics? Or to tease you a bit, they always say that the Russians are so good in math, etc. So Lots of people must know what kind of distribution this is. Slightly disappointing. So in general, these kind of distributions follow what we call Pareto distribution. No, not normal, not uniform, etc. This is Pareto distribution, where we have many people to the left who have low entrepreneurial ability. So they end up very high number of individuals, and we have very few people with very high levels of ability. But if we make a graph where we map out entrepreneurial ability and the expected returns of entrepreneurship, then that's a bit of a curve like expected returns. So the higher your level of ability is in entrepreneurship, the higher expected returns of actually a startup. And then we would have a cutoff point, which is determined by the equilibrium in the labor market, above which entrepreneurial activity would be profitable. Now the crucial insight is, yes, what we do with the Center for Entrepreneurship is we increase entrepreneurial ability because otherwise people not jump to it. But you can also see that whether people jump to entrepreneurship is relative to what they can earn in the labor market. So that is difficult. So are people becoming entrepreneurs because their ability go up or because their relative wage goes down? Probably both. And that's important to study. And you can also say that the rise of the entrepreneurial society simply is because so many people cannot earn a living in employed served anymore because of job polarization. And that's a sad story about the entrepreneurial society. And this is a deeper tragedy. And I point you to, so this is nice about a bit of intuition in your economics. So suppose you are a bank, and now I'm going to tell you about failing and not failing. Lots of entrepreneurs fail. You are entrepreneur, and I take this to maturity, you are entrepreneur. What I cannot see as a bank is your ability as an entrepreneur and your ability as an entrepreneur. I don't know. Not perfect. But I have to give you both a loan to start your company. Or one of you are you. I have to make a choice. If I have no information, I gamble. But there are a few things as a bank which I think are important. How likely do I get it wrong? Now suppose we go back to this theory. This is Joe Stiglitz, by the way. So suppose that on the right hand side, the wages are very high. Then you see that the cutoff point for who become entrepreneurs comes to the right, and only people who know their own ability as fantastic entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs. So if the labor markets are high, I'm pretty sure as a bank that if an entrepreneur comes to me with an idea, and he knows his own ability, and you know your ability, that you must be a good entrepreneur. And I have little risk as a bank. Now these wages drop, and Ivan is going to teach you all to become an entrepreneur. You all go to the bank for a loan. The problem is that a lot of you are useless as entrepreneurs. I don't know who is good, who is bad, and as a consequence of that, as a bank, I simply stop making any loans at all because the risk becomes too high. So the problem here is that if we all try to become entrepreneurs because we have very low wages in the labor market, also the people who are not so talented as entrepreneurs have to become entrepreneurs. The level of failure rates go up, and that shuts down the banking system. So, this becomes pretty complex. The entrepreneurial society, where everybody is pushed towards society, forces us to have different funding schemes because the banks cannot take the risks with other people's money. And that's exactly what we see with crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, and things like that. So as a remark, these are theories from the 1960s and 70s. What I want to show you also, because many of you are studying economics, how far can we get with explaining what we see with relatively simple theories? And that is why economics is such a great science. And you can use these kind of concepts to explain already a lot. So this is my part one. The other parts are half of my lecture, so that is, I have 2 parts, my intro. So let me move a bit to the second part, which is the region. So the first thing is, so if you think about regions, so Tomsk growing as a city, etc., etc. So what is the balancing act that people have? So suppose you live 500 kilometers from Tomsk, somewhere in the countryside. You are engaged in some agricultural production. You're pretty poor, and you think, okay, let me consider whether I should move to Tomsk and look for a job there. Basically, you have the trade-off between, on the one hand, you expect to have a higher wage, but you also have to pay a higher rent. But it can also be travel and things like that. So it's basically a trade-off. That's what we mean in economics. We go between, yes, you expect to earn more, but you also pay more. Obviously, if you don't earn much more and you pay a lot more, you don't do it. But if you expect that the rent is, so this is, let's say, not some kind of an equilibrium. So that must mean that if we see these cities and entrepreneurial regions coming up, it must be that people are expecting to earn more wages there than they pay in rent. That's basically. There are many things, but that is what economics would tell you. So why would these rents be actually higher in the city? Because you can make use of economies of scale. You can work in a factory, for example. You have more diverse people, so you have more complementarities among people. People can specialize better in larger settings. So we know a lot why cities make people more productive. So why the wages are higher. But you would expect that the mechanism. So here you see, and I've taken a picture of, let's say, a very debatable region, because this is about the point. So you know, does anybody know which city this is?
Toronto? Toronto?
Not Toronto. You could guess it if you know who that person is. Jeff Bezos. So then you must know the city. It's Seattle, indeed. It's Seattle, headquarters of Amazon. So it's the newest upcoming type. So Seattle is, let's say, a city which has been transformed the last 20 years into even bigger, let's say, entrepreneurial hub than San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and all because actually entrepreneurship. In this case, not many startups, but just one startup, Amazon, which is a gigantic firm at the moment, and lots of companies start to locate close to Amazon to source IT, etc. So this is Silicon Valley. Now, what is interesting to study is also the dynamics of how this influences the individual decisions. So people move there because of higher wages, because of specialization, but over time what you see is that if people cluster together, that all kinds of mechanisms arise that affect these kind of trade-offs. So a few things are, let's say, if you have lots of people in a city, you want to have arts. But arts are music, paintings, but these artists are also the most important source of new creative ideas. So you create a creative class, as it's called by David Florida, and if you have these kind of entrepreneurial cities which are profitable. If you have a city, then you can have good universities. You have high levels of human capital, and you have a service economy. Starbucks, in a sense, which people like. So these kind of things, and together they form an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And what is important is that if you want to be an entrepreneur in Tomsk, you can have all kinds of ability. But what matters, of course, is that you are supported by your university, by the companies here, by the local government. So it's not only your ability, but also whether you live in an environment where you can leverage those type of abilities, which is important. So over time what we see, if people move to Seattle, because Jeff Bezos has moved there, they create better universities, a service economy, they create a creative class, over time wages go up and you have a cycle of agglomeration. And when does this stop? Economics will tell you, of course, that the marginal productivity of all these people in Seattle will go down over time, but then the other factor, the rents, go up. So what people have to pay to have answers. So this is a nice story. So you know that Microsoft, by Bill Gates, is started in a garage. So a small garage where they started Microsoft. You could still, and this was 20 square meters, this garage. So he started it actually in Seattle, where he's originally from, downtown Seattle. If you want to rent, if you want to buy, sorry, not rent, if you want to buy that 20 square meters, 5 meters, 4 meters today, you know how much you have to pay?
Sorry, can I have one question?
Yes?
If I understand right, it's a scheme only for Seattle or a universal scheme?
It's universal, just an example.
Okay, but what about the real sector of economics, for example, medicine, building, and others?
I'll come back to that later, because that is my point here.
Unfortunately, I must go. Maybe.
So then you ask the question, you answer the question first. This 20 square meters, 5 by 4, what would it cost to buy in Seattle? $2 million. You think you have one hospital left? No. No hospital can pay that. So they're all kicked out. Downtown Seattle. Nobody can pay that. So Bill Gates, you cannot start a startup in Seattle if you have to pay $2 million for a garage. Here you see the economics of the mechanism. Seattle is a fantastic success, but nowadays no startup economy anymore because nobody can pay the rents. That's what economics will tell you. People keep on moving until the other force starts to dominate. So, no government, no hospital. They all have to move away. But there is another bad thing, even worse thing, of the entrepreneurial society. Because this job polarization means that lots of people do not succeed as entrepreneurs, also not in Seattle. If these housing prices go up because of the success, the first one to move out of Seattle are the people who work at Starbucks. And they have to travel 50 miles every day to earn a very low salary because they cannot pay the rent. So the problem of these entrepreneurial societies is, yes, it's very nice, these kind of mechanisms, but for a large part, it is simply hell. And you cannot understand, so think about Brexit. So in the UK wants to end the European Union. Many people have thought, why is that? If you look at who voted against staying in the EU, these are all people who live 100 kilometers from the main cities. These are the people that we're talking about who are killed by the entrepreneurial society. If you think about the rise of Donald Trump, the Midwest, everybody in Silicon Valley votes for the Democrats. But they lost it. And they lost it against all the people who had to move out. And that is where society stops, the entrepreneurial society. So this is a bit of my own research. The previous slide was also, so we did a research for China, how this entrepreneurship mattered, on these entrepreneurial factors, and we showed that entrepreneurial ecosystems really matter, but that also these income levels fall. This is for 280 Chinese cities, and I'm not going to sort of find deeper into it. So you can estimate these kind of effects in a nice way in econometrics in academic papers as well, where we do the interaction on these type of questions. Part 3, institutions. So we have the macroeconomy, we have urbanization as an outcome, and now I move to my last part, which is institutions. So we can think of, in political economics, about how, from a systems perspective, does politics work? And what does this imply for the entrepreneurial society? Now, a basic thing about entrepreneurship is this. Suppose you start a company, and this company is slightly successful. You make a bit of money, and at a certain moment, in the middle of the night, there's a knock on your door. The police. The police take you to prison for some charge, and they say, well, you've done this wrong, that wrong, that wrong. You say, no, I didn't do this wrong. They say, well, then you go to court. You can start a procedure, but that takes 4 years, and these 4 years you stay in prison. And in the meantime, we run your company. So, if that happens, you can imagine that no one becomes an entrepreneur. If that's a risk in your society, nobody will make any money because it's simply too risky and it will be stolen. And it will be stolen in societies where for some reason somebody in that society is above the law, who cannot be caught by the law itself. So the law applies to everybody else, but not to some people. And these people steal, and they cannot be caught. But because we all know it, that it happens, we are not going to do anything. Now, think about a tragic country where that has to move to the entrepreneurial society because all the other engines are dying, capital and labor, but there's still somebody who is above the law, so nobody does it. These countries die, for certain. So the crucial thing in this kind of thing is how do we create a system that nobody is above the law? And that is a bit the same kind of trade-offs that we see in economics. So if you think about political economy, where we start is often that some people in society have real power, de facto power. I give you an example because I post there Erdogan. So what you may not know is that Erdogan has got a real problem. He wouldn't say so directly, but everybody knows, everybody thinks he's nuts, but he isn't, of course. The thing is that Turkey has got a long tradition of military dictatorship and a very strong military who can, if they really want, overthrow him. This military you don't see in society, but they have they used to have de facto power. I will tell you where the military lives, to give you a clue, because the military are the people who are not Muslims. The military is Western oriented, they're not Muslims. They live in Istanbul and nowhere else. So you have two Turkeys, you have Istanbul and you have the rest of Turkey. Istanbul, so Erdogan is from the rest of Turkey. And to sustain himself, he has to fight the de facto political power, which basically is the military. What has the military done? To give you a bit of this thing. What you do is you create a political system where the president has no power at all, and you give all power to the parliament, the Duma, because you know that the Duma is always a chaos, so they make no policy. So then you de facto have the power. So you create a political system that keeps in place your power. So the whole thing of Erdogan, of moving to a presidential system and more power for the president, is to change, as you see, the de facto power to his hands. So this is a mechanism where the de facto power traditionally tries to shape the de jure power, so the rules, regulations, etc., and to shape it. Now out of this power comes also economic institutions. Why are there so many monopolies in Turkey and in Russia, etc., and so little monopolies in the US? This has to do with the transformation of political power into economic power, which creates a different legal set. Some economic institutions are quite important for the emergence of the entrepreneurial society. The point here is that if you have people who have de facto political power and who are above the law, you will not see an entrepreneurial society. The emergence of entrepreneurial societies in countries comes from the fact that so many countries, for example China, India, have moved to a situation where at least entrepreneurs are protected with respect to their returns a bit. Stated differently, the fact that the new president of China throws entrepreneurs in jail is the biggest threat to the Chinese economy, because it gives a signal to all entrepreneurs that they are not safe, and then they don't try it. This is the kind of a mechanism. But the dynamics of the mechanism of the entrepreneurial society is that if you move towards a slightly more, okay, I will tell you something which you know much better than I do, and which you might not agree about Russia. But it could well be that how bad you think your government is, at least it's not an oligarch jungle anymore. Not completely. So yes, they are there. Yes, it's not perfect, but it moves into the right direction. And that is why we see, at least in lots of cities, the emergence of new heroes, new entrepreneurs coming up. The interesting thing is that these new entrepreneurs become important and they start to shape de facto political power. Here again you have the dynamics. The dynamics where de facto political power translates into systems, translates into economic institutions, translates in entrepreneurial society, and then shifts back. So we have the same time. Now you can think, okay, when does this process stop? When it continues? But the crucial takeaway is that we're dying as a macroeconomy. We move to the entrepreneurial society with all kinds of problems. We have urbanization, creating the entrepreneurial society with all kinds of problems. We have institutions, they change towards entrepreneurial society with all kinds of problems, all kinds of dynamics. So these kind of economic theories help us a lot. Okay, so you have social mobility, we said that. So we have three main mechanisms of why society is changing towards an entrepreneurial society, which is basically the death of the macro, urbanization, and political systems that create better institutions that make entrepreneurship safer. These are the three engines of the emergence of entrepreneurial society. What is the biggest threat in politics? There are many threats, and they have a lot to do with the rising inequality in that the entrepreneurial society creates. Vast Bezels with hundreds of billions and many poor people in Seattle. So we would expect that there would be some kind of an equilibrium mechanism in economics that would also stop the entrepreneurial society. And we see it. We see it in Brexit. We see it in Trump. We see it in many instances where the people that are left out by the entrepreneurial society says we have enough of the entrepreneurial society. And in my last slide, I've tried to capture this kind of backlash that we see now. And it's difficult to explain, also if we have a bit of a language barrier, but the basic problem that we see now today is that we have a fight in the West between democracy that we like and the rule of law that we like. And I'll explain this. If you think about Trump, if you think about Erdogan, what they are saying philosophically, we can all dislike them, but what they're saying is, look, we have promised people this, and we are going to keep our promises to the people who have voted for us. So, in a sense, they say, look, we're a democracy. We should do what the majority has given a mandate for. Now, the big problem is what happens if you promise electorate, as an example, that you build a wall between the US and Mexico that is against the US law. So, against the laws. Do you do it or not? The basic problem about democracy is that these people say, look, rules and regulations restrict democracy to do what the people want. So maybe we should get rid of the rule of law. Maybe we should simply have politics, majorities, what you would call the tyranny of the majority, because that is the fairest system. If you keep the rule of law, you cannot do what the majority wants. And that is the most fundamental choice that you see now. Brexit, Trump, the argument here is that they say, look, where do these rules and regulations come from that restrict me? They come from the EU, they come from the World Trade Organization, they come from the UN, they come from the Climate Accord. Let's stop all this. Let's listen to the people. The problem for the entrepreneurial society is, however, that if we're going to do this on a bigger scale, Trump, Erdogan, populist policies, we see rules changing every 2 years. And we create institutional chaos. And the biggest help for the entrepreneurial society is that we don't have institutional chaos. That at least at that front it's predictable what we're doing. And basically what we're doing now is killing the entrepreneurial society because of populism. The big problem is that this populism was also caused by the entrepreneurial society. And that is what economics will tell you. Every force will create a counterforce that it will kill. So it's not that we will see more of the entrepreneurial society. We're more likely to see less in many countries. And that might be a return to low growth, low future prosperity, but it's a fact of life that we have to. And that is why in economics this income inequality debate is so important, because if we want to move forward with that, we have to avoid that. So, entrepreneurship, my main takeaways, is the main ingredient for escaping long-term stagnation. But to make people ambitious entrepreneurship is not easy in labor markets and financial markets. There are all kinds of forces and counter-forces. Cities are important, but again, you see a lot of people dropping out, and in the long run, these political institutions should move to foster the entrepreneurial society. So, this is my reflection from, let's say, 3 parts of economics: macro, spatial, and so urban, and political economics, to inform us about the emerging entrepreneurial ecosystem. Thank you. Questions, discussions? Yes?
If there is any country in the world which has already underwent the process of entrepreneurial society and, for example, returned back to its previous form?
Return back?
Yes.
Well, obviously the US is a big issue now, whether they move back from free trade, for example, this type of open markets towards much more protection, which is a case in point. So I think that as an example, I don't see many examples yet, but we see in Europe, if you think about Austria as an example, where at least populists have won, France to some extent with Macron as well. So we see all kinds of parties, Italy, 5 forces, Spain, Papadamos. What these people are proposing is they have come to power and they're proposing lots of things, like, for example, getting rid of the EU with in Italy kind of thing. So this is exactly this kind of support for regulation. So you see that now people are coming to power. Yes, and that changes the way in which people are dealing with, for example, income inequality, migrants, etc., etc.
So it's mostly about Western countries, not about the Asian ones, right? Like South Korea or Japan.
Well, I've given the example of China. Do you know how many dollar billionaires there are in the Russian, in the Chinese parliament? Out of 200. Dollar billionaires. $1 billion. How many? Out of the 284. That's shocking, you know? So on the one hand, you see that there's a big backlash now against people who have become rich in an ultra-entrepreneurial society who've gone to jail. So you could say, well, to some extent, China is becoming rapidly less entrepreneurial in the last 4 or 5 years because of this income inequality. So it's stretching my argument a bit, but it's a bit of an example. So China can be an example. So that's an Asian example. I think that if you look at Malaysia and countries like that, it's more about stealing of politicians itself than it's about entrepreneurship at the moment, where you see the backlashes. But yeah, the fact that about migration, that Australia has got its 5th prime minister in 6 years, is a case in point that they don't know where they stand. That is. So high unemployment. Things like that. If not, then I thank you all. I give back the floor to Milan, I think. Yeah, okay. Thank you.